I look at it, and it appears to me so Herculean. How do you build such a thing, and how could you ever think you're going to be successful? How would you do such a thing? And then to start up, you're a poor immigrant kid, you come here and you do it. How do you do that? How'd that work?
Sure. Well, I mean, at the beginning of Tesla, I didn't think we would be successful. I thought we would almost certainly fail.
And you put all the money you had in PayPal to invest in this, and you thought you'd fail?
Yeah. I mean, I could walk you through the basic logic of, coming out of PayPal, I was fortunate enough to have about $180 million, and I thought, well, that's a lot of money. You know, if I'm going to assign half of this to SpaceX, Tesla, and Solar City, and I'll still have the other half, and I'll be fine.
Yeah, but you told your wife if it doesn't work when you live in her parents' basement?
I did, yeah. But I was, hopefully kidding, because it's like, it's not great in her parents' basement. It's really not great. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, she didn't like that.
It's very difficult to start companies and quite painful. I think that's important to bear in mind. I don't know if that's probably not encouraging. Let me put it this way. If you need inspiring words, don't do it. So there's a certain amount of carbon that is circulating through the environment. So it's going into the air, being absorbed by, and then getting absorbed by plants and animals, and then going back into the air. And this carbon is just circulating on the surface. And this is fine, and it's been doing that for millions, hundreds of millions of years. The thing that's changed is that we've added something to the mix. So this is what I would call the turd in the punch bowl. So we added all this extra carbon to the carbon cycle, and the net result is that the carbon in the ocean's atmosphere is growing over time. It's much more than can be absorbed by the ecosystem. It's really quite simple. We're taking billions of tons of carbon that's been buried for hundreds of millions of years and is not part of the carbon cycle, taking it from deep underground and adding it to the carbon cycle. The result is that a steady increase in the carbon in the atmosphere and in the oceans, which doesn't look like much if you look at it on this chart, but when looked at in the context of history, it actually looks like this. So the carbon parts per million has really been bouncing around the 300 level for around 10 million years. And then in the last few hundred years, it went into a vertical climb. This is the essence of the problem. This is very unusual.
Well, maybe we're in a simulation right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. Sometimes it feels like that. Yeah, I mean, I think it is going to, from what I've heard of Oculus Rift and some of the other immersive technologies, that it's quite transformative. You really feel like you're there. And then when you come out of it, it feels like reality isn't real. So I think we'll see probably less physical movement in the future as a result of the virtual reality stuff. Yeah.
And when we come out of what we're here now into this virtual reality, we'll think it's real? I mean, it's like we're...
Well, I mean, there's some interesting things here on the virtual reality front. I mean, just on the whole notion of a simulation, which is that if you extrapolate into the future and say, well, how good, let's say, will video games be in 100 or 200 or 1,000 years from now? If there's continued improvement and you're in a full-body haptic suit with a sort of surround vision, and it becomes, beyond a certain resolution, indistinguishable from reality. And there are likely to be millions, maybe billions of such simulations. So then, what are the odds that we're actually in base reality? Isn't it 1 in billions?
Is it? I mean, I can give the counter argument, but I'd rather you give the counter argument.
Obviously, this feels real, but it seems unlikely to be real.
I'm actually quite a big fan of tunnels. Tunnels are so underappreciated.
Please elaborate.
Well, the fundamental problem with cities is that we build cities in 3D.
Yeah.
I mean, you see, you've got these tall buildings with lots of people on each floor, but then you've got roads which are 2D.
Yeah.
So that obviously just doesn't work. You're guaranteed to have gridlock. But you can go 3D if you have tunnels. And you can have many tunnels crisscrossing each other with maybe a few meters vertical distance between them, and completely get rid of traffic problems. And it's my understanding that actually Hong Kong is in the process of building some tunnels, and I was very pleased to hear that. But that really is the solution for solving traffic in major cities.
Yeah, you can also go 3D with flying cars.
You can.
But that's not going to happen for a long time.
Well, I mean, flying cars sound cool, but then they do make a lot of wind, and they're kind of noisy. And
you've thought this out.
The probability of something falling on your head is much higher.
Yeah.
The thought in '95 was that the internet was going to be something really that fundamentally changed humanity. It was like humanity acquiring a nervous system. You know, previously people would communicate information almost by osmosis relative to how the internet works. If you wanted to have access to a lot of information, like you'd go to like the Library of Congress, but unless you were physically where the books were, you didn't have access to that information. But with the internet, you could be anywhere in the world, and if you're connected to the internet, you have access to all the world's information. So it was really just like humanity was almost becoming like a superorganism with a nervous system. So we want to be part of, building some elements of that. And
it was a funny time because it made so much sense to us, but we literally had a guy throw a Yellow Pages book at us. He was a very senior executive, and tell us, do you ever really think the internet is going to replace this?
Yeah.
And literally, and you're kind of looking at them going, this guy's screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, and people didn't know what the internet was.
Yeah.
Including in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was like something that universities and like the government used, and nobody was really doing anything on it, and you certainly couldn't make money.
Yeah.
Through the end of '95, that's essentially we're just sleeping in the office and chowing at the YMCA, and then around the end of '95 is when Netscape went public, and then whether or not somebody knew what the internet was, they knew that you could make money on the internet somehow, or even if it's only on the greater fool theory. So when we went and talked to venture capitalists in early '96, there was a much greater interest in what we were doing. In fact, the round closed in like maybe a week or something.
It's crazy. Yeah, we went from sleeping in the office to people throwing, again, this is a financial crowd, so you guys see these numbers every day, but for us to hear, we'll give you $3 million.
Yeah, it sounded extremely, we thought they were crazy. Like, why would they do that?
It was literally like, these people are insane.
They obviously do not realize we're sleeping in the office.
In fact, when they did fund us, they realized that we were illegal immigrants.
Well,
yes, we were.
I'd say it was a gray area.
Yeah, yes, we were. We were illegal immigrants. We were sleeping in the office. We didn't have a car. We had one car, but the wheel kept falling off.
But, well, actually, yeah, the wheel did actually fall off the car.
Yes, exactly. And the venture capitalists actually bought us cars.
Yeah, well, they gave us 40 grand.
It was 40 grand to go buy cars, which was, at the time was more money than we'd ever seen.
Yeah, and I bought I spent $35K on a Series 1 67 Jaguar E-Type.
Which didn't drive, but he got what he wanted.
Yeah, it looked really great by the side of the road.
he got it. He was driving it home from the dealer, and it broke down, and he had to actually come to the house on a flatbed truck.
Right. It didn't improve from there. I mean, it was really brutal.
Should have kept the truck.
Yeah.
In college, my interest in sustainable energy was purely, at the time, was really from the standpoint of us eventually running out of hydrocarbons to mine and burn. So there's obviously limited supply of oil in the ground, and eventually we would have to transition to something that's sustainable. Because when we're drawing oil from the ground, we're essentially taking the accumulated solar energy that was bound up in plants and animals, and then over hundreds of millions of years was turned into oil. And that's obviously finite, and if we run out of that and don't have a good solution, then there would be economic collapse, independent of any environmental concerns. And so that was actually what sort of initiated my interest in sustainable energy. And it's sort of tautological. I mean, if you know, energy needs to be sustainable if it's going to last for the long term. And then over time it became apparent that there was actually an even more pressing concern, which is that we're quite materially changing the chemical constituency of the oceans and atmosphere. And the way that humanity has kind of grown up around the world is that you know, we've put so many of our cities and settlements and towns right along the coastline, and you know, and the world is quite sort of delicate in these sort of chemical balance. And so that if we do take trillions of tons of CO2 that was buried deep underground and has been since, in a lot of cases, since the pre-Cambrian era, you know, when the most sophisticated thing was like a sponge, then it would be a bad experiment to run.
So it seems so obvious, and we have all these car companies that make all these cars every year that burn gasoline, and nobody wanted to do anything. But why? Why? So it's so obvious. You know, you read in evidence, and Exxon was in the paper about the impact that they're having on the environment, and they hit it, just like the cigarette companies in 1964.
Yeah, just like the cigarette companies.
Same exact thing, right?
It's the same playbook. In fact, the crazy thing is, I'd recommend reading the book Merchants of Doubt, because they actually explored, some scientists at JPL and elsewhere sort of explored, like, well, what's going on here? And they actually found that the oil and gas industry is actually using literally the same lobbyists as the tobacco industry, like by name, not even the firm.
Amazing.
Like some of those guys they're still going.
Amazing.
But one of the great things I admire about Elon is when he wants something, he really wants it, and he goes and gets it. And it's amazing to watch him do that as his brother, and he's done it throughout his life.
Interesting.
Well, I think Kimball is just one of the nicest people I know in the world. I've never in all my life seen Kimball intentionally do a mean thing. So I admire that a great deal.
What would have happened if the fourth one hadn't worked?
We would have failed. Yeah.
But let's talk about one of the failures were spectacular. So, I mean, I would go out to the island, Kwajalein with Elon, and seeing giant exploding rockets is quite an amazing sight. And I was one of the early investors in SpaceX, and I said, you know what? If all I get to do is to see these rockets explode, it's well worth every dime I put into this company.
There's something to be said about brotherly support.
But it was an amazing thing to watch what Elon had built with those rockets on a shoestring in the middle of nowhere, and literally the middle of the Pacific, 2,000 miles from Hawaii. And that experience, we'd fly in these what are they called? What are those
Hueys?
helicopters? Hueys. You're flying the Hueys. You feel like you're right out of Apocalypse Now, flying to Dr. Evil's island. Really amazing. I mean, and again, worth every penny, still to this day, I'd say. So I think the failures were actually unbelievably exciting to be part of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Elon.
You're welcome.
In the rocket industry, people have thought about reusability for a very long time. It just happens that Earth's gravity is quite strong, and it's just barely possible to get reasonable payload to orbit with an expendable rocket. So then if you add reusability, then that tends to give it negative payload to orbit, so you can't...
So how do you do it?
So you've got to do two things. You've got to really advance the core rocket technology itself, as far as the engines, the airframe, the avionics, the recovery systems, like the landing legs, and the boost back capability. You've got to make the rocket such that if it was in a pure expendable mode, it would get approximately 4 or slightly more than 4% of its payload mass to orbit. And to put this in perspective, normally a rocket gets about 2% of its payload mass to orbit. So it's a very small number. But if you can push that to 2-ish% to more like 4% on an expendable basis, and then be really efficient in the way that the reuse takes place, such that the reuse penalty is only maybe half of that, so you still have a net payload to orbit of 2%. That's essentially what's needed to achieve reusability. I mean, SpaceX has been at it now for 13 years, and we haven't yet achieved it. So, so I think what we've done thus far is evolutionary, not revolutionary. But I think we're within sort of shooting distance of this. I think within the next year we'll be able to land the rocket intact. We'll be able to land the rocket, just not intact. It's like there's some exciting videos on YouTube if you want to watch them. But I think we're close to landing it intact, and then we need to examine the rocket once we get it back to see what needs to be strengthened, where do we over-strengthen things that we don't need to add as much mass, and then we'll be able to do reusability with the rocket. And just like some of these things are maybe they're not obvious to people who aren't familiar with the rocket industry, but the cost of our rocket is to build it is $60 million, and but the cost of the propellant, the fuel and oxygen and so forth, is only about $250,000.
Wow.
Or maybe $300,000 thereabouts. But it's basically, it's only about as expensive as, say, fueling up a 747.
So you're seeing live footage of Course I Still Love You, our drone ship